Most, hardcore strength coaches and therapists and trainers will tell you most athletes are underprepared and underloaded coming back from injury. Hope is a bad strategy. I'm not involved with anything that has to do with hope. I want to make sure I can gauge what we're doing going forward.
Our modern strength and conditioning coach should be able to manage, delegate, adapt, have a growth mindset, be effective in communication, have administrative skills, and follow a budget. They should have a degree in exercise, compete as an athlete, and have real experience.
We have to be skilled in technology and teaching technique, but I want to bring us back to talking about people.
The overwhelming majority of associate athletic directors, they don't know what we do. They don't know what the performance unit does. And I think that's really critical to understand because they're overseeing the reason why we have an athletic department. Every single athlete, you'd think there'd be some pinpoint focus on that.
Thanks. All right, we're going to start this up today. So everybody, welcome to another edition of All Access. Today, we've got truly world-class speakers on here. And before I get to them, I just want to hit you with just a few stats of the collective of these three speakers. There is over 80 years of strength and conditioning knowledge that we are going to hear right now. They have won championships at every single level you could imagine, high school, college, pro. They've seen it all. They've done national championships, division, regional, everything. Bigger than all that stuff is the impact they've made on so many people's lives. I've heard it time and time again on all three of them. When people are asked who is the biggest influence in their lives, it always comes back to that strength coach. So for us, we're deeply humbled and honored to be able to have you on this show. And I want to thank you literally from the bottom of my heart. But let's jump into this and let me give a quick intro to what today's show has. First on our list is Coach Bob Alejo from Cal State Northridge. He's going to be talking about the collegiate high performance model. Following him is going to be Coach Andrea Hootie from Texas men's basketball, talking about why periodization is dead. And rounding out our day, and new to sharing his screen and all this Zoom stuff, is Coach Chip Morton, one of the most legendary strength coaches in the field, longtime Cincinnati Bengals strength coach. And he's just going to talk about we are better together. So again, you better have your pen and papers ready because the knowledge that's coming out of us over this next 40 minutes is going to be absolutely incredible. I'm going to turn this over to Will Ali with our first introduction, and I'm super excited, and I thank you again for all being here. Will, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and for those of you on the coast, well, I hope you've been awake for a little bit. I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, and truthfully, I'm honored because I've learned a lot from this individual, though he may not know it or not. If you haven't read any of his articles, then you've probably heard him speak, whether it be on the NSCA podcast or many others. And if you haven't done any of that, you've probably heard what he has to say within 140 characters or less on social media. I personally believe he is the epitome of the phrase success leaves clues. And part of that is because of his experience with Olympians, professional baseball, a number of college programs he's been around, but even fitness companies such as Powerlift. You probably won't catch him taking credit for any of their success, but I'm sure his impact has been one of the common denominators. I'm also a firm believer in mastering the basics, and as Newton said, standing on the shoulder of giants, which is why I find myself referencing him oftentimes with our interns. And one thing that he said that stuck with me for a while was, tell me what you're doing now, and I'll tell you what we used to call it. So I go back to books. His title is a mouthful, but his impact continues to be vast. He's currently the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Performance and Student Welfare at California State University, Northridge. And today he is speaking with us. So it's my pleasure to present to the virtual stage, Bob Alejo.
Wow. Okay. So I wasn't sure you were going to introduce me because the guy you talked about sounds like he's really good according to you. So I got to figure out how to make this thing happen. Hey, great to have you all here. Good morning. Wow. With my dear friend, Andrea Hootie, and with Coach Morton. I mean, this is, I'm glad you had me go first because then people are going to understand that I'm not dumb. Because if I go after them, they're going to say, what is this guy, man? That's like, it's not happening. All right, so here we go. Collegiate high performance model, right? And although I'm going to talk about this also has the capability of being for any unit, right? But this is where I'm at right now. This is the thing I've squawked about for years in 140 characters or more, because I think it has to be involved at the collegiate level for the athletes to get the best thing. Because the strength coaches, we've seen what a flawed system looks like, right? We've seen it. Now, if you think about it, oftentimes this model is criticized all over the world, right? Like, well, you know, we had this model at the pro level. We had this model at the college level. Wasn't any good. The model works. It's the personnel that screw it up. Trust me when I tell you, it's the personnel that blow this thing out, because the system is a good deal. The reason why it has had so much criticism is because that, you know, first of all, we've seen instances where maybe the manager qualified, right? That's a big deal, right? And that has to go along with the hiring practices. So who's hiring that person? Do we have anybody hiring that person that actually knows what that person is doing and knows if they have the sort of expertise to have oversight of the performance units, right? We've seen no interpretation of the model that looks solid. You know, there's been a couple of write-ups on it, and you know, I've seen a couple of papers on it where they've had 6 or 7 different job responsibilities in these announcements, and none of them are the same, right? Even when you call people, and I've done this, right, with my title, basically, you'll find that they don't do the same things. And so that's, you know, it's just not defined enough to say, okay, here's what you're going to do. Okay, so if you're not going to do that, then you have no expectations. You can't really grab on anything. In a lot of instances, we've had where maybe the role or the person was qualified, but there's no authority in the role. So again, then it ends up being what we've had the problems with over time. We coach, hey, we're running too much, we're lifting too much, we're stretching too much, or we're not doing enough. And then it just becomes suggestions. And the next thing you see out there is nothing that you've talked about. And that doesn't work well. And of course, you know, historically, the hierarchy is always the sport coach. And I can tell you that that's the least reliable delivery system for student athletes. It's not that hard, right? And so when Chip and I and Andrew were talking earlier, or I was just kind of being a fly on the wall, they were talking about all these podcasts that you see. And oftentimes it's easy to get caught up in looking at, you know, what's happening in Europe and in other places. And it sounds like Chip says, like, holy cow, am I doing the right thing? Wow, these people are really smart. Sounds very complicated, very complex. It's not. My setup is just like this. And it's not any different than this in most places. And that's what you have to understand. It's not that complex. So the question would be, is it the best model? And frankly, I think it's the best delivery system because it streamlines the communication, which means the application is clear. It gives somebody like myself or Chip or Andrea with a lot of experience cross-pollinating against and across all these units to be able to say, maybe that rehab is a little bit too short or a little bit too long. Maybe that lifting cycle has too much for this time. We're working on speed instead. How's the nutrition looking on the other end? Are we really looking at that for recovery? So it gives you an extra pair of eyes. Most importantly, it allows the sport coaches to concentrate on, wait for it, sports, not training, not nutrition, not flexibility, not anything but the thing with the ball, the pool, the hoop, whatever it is. You go do that. Let us handle the rest. I think it's the best possible way for developing athletes. And so this right here is really what you want to concentrate on. It's got to be the first thing you do when you have a system like this. It's what I realized immediately needed to be done. But it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be the high performance director or the associate AD to do this. This should be inside your unit as a strength and conditioning coach. It should be inside your unit as the director of sports medicine, the director of sports nutrition. One thing you have to do is standardize the language, right? So let's just talk about it in terms of strength and conditioning. You can't have one coach writing a program for a reverse lunge and that same movement is called a one-legged squat on the other sport, right? You can't do that because what happens if I have to work with your team? I mean, I won't know what's going on. So that language has to be the same. On an expanded sort of landscape, it's the same thing in sports medicine, right? Athletic trainers and what we do is essentially the same thing. They just work with a different population, right? They have a population that's coming back from ground zero. We have a fitter population that's moving forward. But there's no such thing as a rehab squat, right? There's no such thing as a rehab lunge. It's either a lunge or a squat with the functional criteria for that. So that language has to be the same. It has to be the same on the injury report. It has to be the same on the strength and conditioning program. That's important. Same with reporting lines. You can't have people just talking to everybody all around the place, right? There has to be a sequence of reporting, good or bad. It doesn't have to be reporting something bad, but there has to be a sequence where this thing goes forward. I can't have an assistant athletic trainer coming to me as a senior associate, because now you're undercutting the power of your oversight person, right? You've got to make sure that's in place with the director of sports medicine. But those reporting lines are important for one other reason. You won't have 4 people telling the athlete what to do, right? And all of a sudden now this thing gets mixed up. Formal and informal meetings, it's apparent that you standardize formal meetings, but I would think, and I know most people would agree here, that the informal meetings is what drives the business. If you look at business models, I do a lot of looking in the Harvard Business Review. They'll tell you that mid-management drives all businesses because there's more of them than there is of supervision, of oversight. So all those informal meetings that you walk by, how you feeling, what you doing, nice lift, what's going on today, those add up into training. It adds into history, it adds into intuition, and it's actually documentation of sorts, right? Which leads me to the next thing. Make sure everything's got to be written down. Like, how many times have you seen this in certain areas? Oh, I gave so-and-so this kind of diet. Oh, this is, they couldn't run today, so I put them on the bike. Okay, for how long? 20 minutes. Did you get a heart rate? Did you get a resistance? Did you get a speed? Those things are important. What do? That's exactly what we do. You want to see what we do in the weight room? I got sets, reps, loads, day, time, exercise sequence, all those things. So I got to expect that same thing from my sports nutritionist, my sports scientist, and my athletic trainer. I need all those things. You can't just say they rolled the bike for 20 minutes. That doesn't do me any good. So the protocols as well, right? So you can't have the volleyball team doing a counter movement jump that looks different than that same jump that the soccer team does. Standardize the protocols against the whole department if you can. Now, not everybody does the same tests, but there's a few tests that everybody does do. I think it's important that you standardize those tests so that they're the same thing, and you can look, because there's something to learn about a soccer athlete and a 50-yard freestyle sprinter, those 2 vertical jumps. There's something there for you to look at and compare, because a lot of similarity is there, right? Common exercises, power lifts, Olympic lifts, plyometrics. And so you can look at the efficacy of some of those things. And in the end, here's the biggest thing, right? Here's what I found to be the biggest thing. You have to agree, especially in this model, what return to competition is. So if I got healthy athletes, we just train them, right? If somebody's got an ACL and they're in their 3rd month of recovery, well, that's back there. But when we get going to combining the two, where we're all working together, there has to be an agreement on what exactly is going to happen for this person to hit the field, pull the court. And in that is not just return to play, it's return to training, right? Then it's return to sports skills. Then it's return to practice. I think those things are critical to understand. Like return to play, there's a big gap in between rehab and return to play. Return to training, can they squat? Can they clean? Can they bench press, right? And what's happening in that movement? You don't just jump out to practice unless you can, dribble a ball left-handed, then right-handed, then cut. You don't want to go into a game. You want to be able to prove all that. And at the same time, everybody has a measurement of metrics that you have to go to. And right now, the standard there is greater than 90% out of the healthy model. So, it's not that hard to figure out, right? If you have a 30-inch vertical jump and you're coming back from whatever it is, long-term, short-term injury, and you can't jump 27 inches, you're not ready to go. So now you've got to justify that. Well, that's science, right? That's physiology. If you're going to go out there and be a 100-meter sprinter and your squat's only 75% of your best, that's not good enough, right? So we have to have not like, oh, they look pretty good, or I had them jog a little bit, and they're like, that's not a metric. So this is also within the unit going into the next step. If you can't balance on one leg or two legs, what makes you think you're going to be able to jump off a 24 to 36 inch box and land correctly? I mean, that's a lot of force. So, again, there's a lot of common sense involved. But I think the most important takeaway here is the metrics. Make sure you have something that tells you that goes to the next level. And in all the cases, if any, it's got to be coming back from injury. We've seen it too often. Most, hardcore strength coaches and therapists and trainers will tell you most athletes are underprepared and underloaded coming back from injury. And you just can't do that because it's hard enough to try to duplicate, if not impossible, anything in training in the weight room. So once you get into a game where who knows what's going to happen, now you've just subjected yourself to the unknown. And I frankly, hope is a bad strategy. I'm not involved with anything that has to do with hope. I want to make sure I can pretty much gauge what we're doing going forward. So there's my email. If you guys want to contact me, my Twitter feed is there. I haven't been probably as active as I have been, but maybe that's because nothing's really upset me yet.
Well, Coach, thank you. All of that is great. Quick question on that.
Yep.
So the model and everything of that is great. I think a lot of strength programs want to get to that, or even performance programs want to get to that. What is your suggestion on some of the first steps on the validation with the administration? Is it something coming from the CSCCA or NSCA? Like, how do we get to that perfect model?
Well, listen, I know this to be true. There's a ton of people that can do that. There's not but a handful of job positions like I have. Honestly, I can only think of really a couple others right now. Eric Korm and Pat Ivy are the only two I think that have this position with the background necessary, because the overwhelming majority of associate athletic directors are just sports management, or just, they don't know what we do. They don't know what the performance unit does. And I think that's really critical to understand, because they're overseeing the reason why we have an athletic department. Every single athlete, you'd think there'd be some pinpoint sort of focus on that. In my case, I have an athletic director who's a former Division I decathlete. There's no shortage of support from him. So it's that piece right there. And, once you structure it, it's not as if there's not examples of how to run this here. I mean, Europe's been doing a pretty good job of setting the system up. Now, you can argue one way or another, whether it works or not, but the system works. It's almost like talking about squats. So squats is a bad exercise. Well, the squat is inanimate. It's who's coaching it. The barbell doesn't do anything. You fix that movement right, and it's a fantastic exercise. It's the same thing. So, you can certainly contact me if you want to talk about it, but I would say more than anything, do your homework. It's what I've showed you here is simple, but it is simple. It's about increasing the communication. It's about understanding your role in the system. And it's making sure that it's collaborative to understand where the roles start and where they end. At some point, for example, the rehab exercise is no longer a rehab exercise. So when you're doing an exercise, for example, and saying it's strengthening at a week 2 of an ACL, week 3, it's no longer strengthening, right? So you got to realize where the strength coach come in, when the trainer, or same with the sports science, right? What is the standardization there? And once you come up with a format that says, here's how I'd like to standardize our performance unit, here's the responsibilities, here's the thresholds of blending in, probably more importantly with return to play than just regular training, because that's where the system really pays off. Then you have a chance to convince somebody of it. The problem is the person above, right? I mean, even the Big 12 commissioner talked about, after a couple of catastrophic injuries, that there's a problem with the hiring practices of strength coaches, the qualifications and all that. Well, okay, let's say that's true, but the person that oversees, typically, historically, commonly, athletic training, sports nutrition, strength and conditioning, sports science, doesn't have any grip on what that means. Just a general kind of pop out there. How many times has your senior associate athletic director spent 1 day a week in your weight room?
Very
One
little.
day a month in your weight room?
Yeah.
One day every 6 months in your weight room? And I'm not talking about coming in, checking it out for an hour. You think I can go anywhere in the country? I mean, I think I'm pretty good. I know I'm old. I've seen a bunch. I can't go in a weight room for an hour and understand, oh, yeah, no, you're good. Right?
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
the hiring practices is the killer, the one above the top.
Yeah. I think it just takes a collective. It takes all of us and listening to great minds and experienced minds like you and making a big push for it, because that's the only way it's going to change and really best serve the athlete. So I thank you for all that. I know this won't be the last time we're going to be talking to you about this kind of stuff. So we will be, we'll definitely keep in touch, and grateful for you to join us today. But I'm going to pivot now to your good friend. I'm going to take us back to 2015. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm with Indiana basketball. We're in the NCAA tournament, and we're the 10 seed. So our hotel it's way on the outskirts of town, and it's nowhere near Kansas's hotel. So I didn't get a chance to meet anybody there, but we did share a locker room with Kansas for the open practice round, for the media practice. And we're walking in, and Coach Self walks out, and right behind him is Coach Hoodie. And we looked at each other, and we gave each other that, like, I know you're the strength coach, so I'm just going to give you that nod, what's up kind of thing. And then you just keep walking. And that's my personal story with Coach Hoodie. And I've admired from afar, but I haven't get to know her. But I hope to more after being on the show today. So I thank you for coming on. But I wanted to reach out to people that knew Coach. And so I have Janae Jackson, who was one of my mentors and helped shape the way I carry myself as a coach. He had this to say about Coach Hoodie. Said, Andrea Hoodie is one of the most innovative coaches in the game today. She has the ability to get the most out of each and every athlete in her program. Truly one of the best. And then I went to someone that was recently on the show, Dan McKim. He's a world record Highland Games athlete and former guest on our show. And he said, honestly, she is one of the coolest, most down-to-earth folks in the industry. She analyzed me leading up to one of my last years of competing. After we tweaked a few things in my deficiencies in my body, I threw 2 new personal bests that season. Always loved talking shop with her. And lastly, our head volleyball coach here at Indiana, Coach Steve Aird, has gotten to know her pretty well. And he said, I am really lucky to know Hoodie. She is a true professional and a fantastic human being. She was a trailblazer in so many ways and worked so hard to achieve greatness. I know so many that have become a better version of themselves because of her, and that's including me. So myself, as well as the Indiana Strength staff, we're grateful to have you. And Coach Hoodie, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. I don't feel like I deserve that, but thank you. And I wanted to thank you guys at Indiana University Strength for putting this on. It's such a great event, and to follow Coach Alejo and then to come before Coach Morton, it's a pretty cool privilege. So thank you guys for having me. And Coach Alejo's, his presentation kind of led into, let me see here if I can share my screen.
Maybe advance.
It's not letting me share.
There we go.
There we go. All right, so sorry about that. So Coach Alejo's presentation then can lead into what I wanted to talk about today, which is the end of periodization right in front of us. And the fact that you have to take these people or these athletes and look at them as individuals and understand where they're coming from competition, injury, all these different things. We have to look at the individual and see how the individual responds to competition and training, injury, and all these things. So, and instead of periodizing anymore, we adapt to each individual based on the technology that we have. So our goal with training these athletes for team sports is to create the healthiest. And with that, they're resilient and robust, but then also the most consistent athlete on a day-to-day basis. I think each one of us on this call has probably dealt with athletes, probably more often than not, that actually are different every day. So how can we, as coaches, help them to be the most consistent power producing or force producing athlete on a day-to-day basis with positive results? So again, the two goals are, can we create healthy and can we create consistent? And the best ability an athlete could have is availability, because I know the worst athletes that we have are probably the injured ones because they create a lot of other issues. So with that, we were talking earlier before the call that how do we do that? And you have to have a great culture in the weight room with what Coach was saying, with constant communication, developing relationships. But since 2012, I've been fortunate enough to work with some data or technology to collect data in the weight room that drives a lot of our programming, whether we change it daily, weekly, monthly. But my argument is then periodization is dead if we're treating these people as individuals, because we can't just program like we used to under all these European research things and what has been going on with traditional linear periodization. We can't treat it as one major competition anymore. Now we have 35 on average. Let's just use basketball, for example, and we're competing 2 to 3 times a week. So I don't know if we can use this periodization or linear periodization model anymore. I don't think I've used linear periodization since 2004. So I'm finally catching up with myself saying that it's almost dead. So not to take away from what's going on in the labs and whatnot, because I do believe in the research and what's coming out, but how can we apply it to real life? So the science and old linear periodization models or linear periodization models were based on the resistance training being their sport. So how can we bridge the gap to resistance training used to increase the health and performance of our athletes? Can we optimize power on a daily basis and do it consistently? Can we flatten the asymmetries, not just left versus right? I think left versus right anymore, I don't even think about that anymore. Thinking about other asymmetries that we have to deal with, and can we decrease the opportunity of injury? All this coming from the fact that I was an injured athlete, and it's miserable when you're hurt, and you're hurt all the time. So where do we start? So can we start with these linear periodization principles and guide it to a flexible nonlinear, or do we even plan for it anymore? Because the reality of it is that we answer to our sport coaches, for the most part. We have to win to keep our jobs. So there's constant changes going on with academics, personal life, the intensity of practice, whether the game went into overtime, however many minutes you played, were you hurt? So this was 2002, I think, 2002 or 2003. This was a graph that I gave to Dr. Kramer when he was down the hall at the University of Connecticut, where the first part of the graph there, the first 63 days approximately, they're nonlinear planned. So we were hitting the spectrum of strength on the force load or the load velocity curve every day during the week. So then right there about day 64, we went into flexible nonlinear periodization, where we just adapted to what I was given from the athletes on the court. So you can see how the variability of that graph changes as soon as competition starts. So that was back in, I think it was 2002 or 2004 with Doc Kramer. So anymore though, our training is testing, because we consider the weight room part of our practice culture now. So when we do have the athletes in the weight room, which is every day, it's part of our practice culture, we use Sparta Sport Science to look at movement sequencing, measurements of force in a vertical jump. We use Elite Form for velocity, power, and work, and then we use Catapult as a guide for practice. So we're constantly collecting all of this information, and okay, well, what do we use? Because there's a ton of information. We get the objective feedback from the technology. We use subjective feedback from our athletes, but our lagging KPIs, which drives everything, is health and performance. But our leading ones are rate of force development, average concentric output, impulse. We're looking at power, velocity, and work. So this is an example of what we did with Dr. Fry at Kansas, where this was a team. So year one, this was our squat test. We trained across the continuum. We went, just for example, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of their squat max. And we graphed it on a force velocity curve. And then year two, we actually pushed that force velocity curve up and to the right. That B graph shows that power output increased from about 550 to over 600. What was impressive about this, I think, and the results that we had were that these were both guards and bigs. So it wasn't just the guards getting better, it was everybody was getting better. So these were team averages that we used for this flexible nonlinear, but it also covered that whole load spectrum. So having the weight room as part of our practice culture has really been advantageous for us increasing power output and creating the health of our athletes. Because again, we can't determine what direction practice heads. We can't determine the intensity or the minutes or the volume of competition sometimes. Injuries come up, and academics, readiness is best when classes aren't in session, is what we've found. So let's see. So when we look at some asymmetries, we're not just, I put left and right out there on the right, and we have to look at, okay, eccentric versus concentric. What type of athlete are we working with, and what can we do to make them healthier? Do we have to slow things down? We found with Dr. Fry that upper body mass really took away from power output with our basketball players as compared to lower body mass. So that was an asymmetry that we found. And then some athletes are stronger and some actually move better when they're moving faster. So can we eliminate a lot of asymmetries that we find in each individual athlete? So I agree with Coach Alejo in that our modern strength and conditioning coach, right, should be able to manage, delegate, adapt, grow, or have a growth mindset, be effective in communication, have administrative skills, and follow a budget. They should have a degree in exercise, compete as an athlete, and have real experience. So a lot of our success is based on the fact of we have to have great interpersonal skills and really, you know, have the specific skills, but really work on our interpersonal skills for management. And that's all I have.
Coach, actually going off of that very last point that you said, at the last time I saw you, I think was in DC for one of those play conferences. And I remember sitting there with my my intern squad, and one of them had just given a presentation to our staff on you and was so nervous to meet you. And your compassion and grace and just being able to take the time to talk with her. I mean, that interpersonal skill, that's exactly it. So I thank you so much for your wisdom and just being so dynamic that you are in this field. Every time I hear you speak, I feel like you speak on something totally different. And so just the wealth of knowledge from different areas, I know I really appreciate. So thank you so much for that. I know that I can't tell you all how excited I am to introduce Coach Chip Morton. This is a super big highlight for me. We were able to have him a couple of years ago. We hosted an SPA conference and he spoke at it. And I know we have a couple members on staff that had a direct line with him and an impact from him. But to be able to feel what you feel in a room when you're with this man, there's probably not another person in this world that you'll feel that much love from without necessarily knowing personally. And so, I mean, his resume goes without saying. I mean, he has over 30 years in the field, from professional to youth to collegiate. He's worked with, most recently with the Bengals, but many other NFL teams, conference championships, Super Bowls. I mean, the man is a legend, but just who he is as a person is I'm just so grateful to have him on here and learn from him. So Coach Chip Morton, the floor is yours.
There we go. Thank you, Lainey, and thank you, Indiana Strength staff. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This is my first opportunity. Am I on now? Is that on? Tell me if that's on. Okay. This is my first, so a couple firsts. This is my first time sharing in this form, doing a screen share. So I'm learning, I'm growing today. But it's interesting. Thank you for the kind words. And, you know, Coach Bob and Coach Andrea, really, they're iconic coaches and even better people. And so I am thrilled and I'm really humbled to be a part of this. It's a really neat format. That said, you know, Coach Bob talked about the high performance model. And within that, some of the things I picked out, he talked about the need for collaboration to make it work, the need for communication and humility. Coach Andrea, we were on before the session and we talked about, and she made the statement, it's still all about coaching and people. And as bright as she is and as much as she does with training and science, what stands out to me, even in these 10 minutes, are what people say about her and their experiences with her, and that she gets, you know, things like she gets the most out of people, and her interpersonal skills are amazing. And she talked about creating a culture. So I guess this is a perfect segue into what I want to talk about. And actually, in all honesty, I am between jobs. So I've had a lot of time to consider and reflect on my career and what I'm about. And I've had a number of interviews. I'm still involved in some. And throughout the interview process, and I'm going to give you all a different different lens on things. I'll give you the number. I've had 8 formal interviews, hours of formal interviews. And the questions have not been about X's and O's. Everybody has asked me, they all want to know, and I'm talking professional teams to military opportunities, to a high school, they want to know, will I fit the culture? They want to know about me. So it's funny, going into the hiring season, I was prepared for, my programming and talk about where I'm at now. And I had all my files set up, but in essence, it wasn't about X and O's, it was about people. Coach Johnny Parker, who's another veteran coach, I think he said it well. He said, he stated once somewhere, I coach people, not weights. So we have to have the knowledge, we have to have the science, we have to be skilled in technology and teaching technique. But I want to bring us back to talking about people, the people factor. So my title is, you can see, if it's on there, we're going to talk about me, as in each one of us, evaluating ourselves, you being our athletes, others around us, and we together. And note that we are better together. So one of the terms thrown around quite a bit currently in the popular literature and social media is culture, and creating a culture. Coach Hoodie talked about that, creating a positive culture. And I like this definition. It's from Dr. Paul White. It's the aggregate of hundreds of thousands of interactions between individuals, including daily communication. So whether it's a one-on-one conversation, whether it's a formal or informal meeting, whether it's sharing data, all those interactions, whether they be positive and building people up or negative, taking away from the organization, that's the culture. So we better, as Coach Andrea said, we better get good at communicating. In order to manage people or come alongside people, we better be good at it. Now, if you note at the top of the screen, I said it takes intention. For some people, having empathy, being able to see people, being able to share honestly, it might be more natural. For others, it might not be your personal makeup. You might be introverted. You might not feel confident in certain situations. You might not be confrontational or able to deal with confrontation. So in that case, there is a degree in either case of intention. You have to be intentional about it. So let's start with me, meaning you. This will be the pep talk. Okay, the first is finding your calling, and I just rediscovered the word finding your calling. I just rediscovered that very recently in a study, and it's an old Reformation word, and it had a spiritual base to it, and that's where I'm coming from as well. But your calling is, what are you called to do? What lights up your heart? What is it that excites you? When you're talking about this profession and the day-to-day, making a day-to-day difference with people, your calling is what's going to drive you. What is your purpose? The more common term now is, what's your why? Everybody will understand that one. Do you have a vision for what you're doing? So identify what lights up your heart, but then also identify your gifts. What am I good at? I talked about intention in the previous slide. Maybe I need to work on my communication skills. Maybe for me, I need to learn to listen more and talk less. But what are your gifts? Can you teach? Are you good at teaching? Are you good at caring? Are you good at serving? What are they? And then hone them, continue to work on them, but also identify the areas where maybe I'm not so good. For me, it's listening. So for me, I've got to be very aware of listening first. Next, we should always be seeking wisdom. And that's with people, from people, and with people, and also certainly knowledge and programming. One of the things that you'll see on this call with this lineup, including me, we've all been coaching a long time. And I think there is something, we kid about it. And, Coach Leo talked about being an old guy. Well, I'm probably an old guy too, young at heart, but older in chronologically. But there is wisdom to be had from people that have been there before. Some of the questions with this, the quarantine time, a lot of coaches, I had young coaches calling me and asking, what I've never done this before. What should I do? Or how do we approach this? What are some thoughts? And we went through the same thing in 2011 in the NFL with the player, with the collective bargaining agreement lockout. We didn't see our players until training camp. And we sent home workouts at the time. That was in 2011. There wasn't much virtual going on back then. So you sent workouts, not having really any way to really, besides phone calls, to find out whether they were doing it or not. But we'd meet as a staff throughout the spring, and it kept getting pushed back. And then finally, it came down to, we're going to see our players in training camp. And so it was Coach Marvin Lewis who actually suggested in a staff meeting that I call some of the older strength coaches. Jerry Attaway, who had been with the 49ers for all those Super Bowl years, he said, call Coach Attaway and see what his thoughts were. And he was a retired coach at the time, and I called Coach Johnny Parker as well. And they had great insight on how to handle it, just experiential insight. So I was seeking wisdom from older, experienced coaches that had gone before me, as well as the current science from our RD and from the exercise science community. So it was seeking wisdom, both current knowledge and the cutting edge knowledge, but also talk to people who've been there before. And then finally, in finding your calling and finding your purpose, each day here's the pep talk part, each day is a new one, and it's full of opportunities. So, live each day, learn all you can, and grow in relationship, in knowledge, and in your skill set. Because life is rich, and I say life is rich in that includes both the good times and the hard times. Richness can be deep emotion either way. but it all makes life better. So experience it. So now here's the real talk. So I just gave you the pep talk on finding your calling. The real talk is it's important to have a proper view of yourself. And we're talking here about humility. Certainly don't think of yourself more highly than you are. That's just humility. And Coach Alejo talked about having humility in meetings and with athletes, and being able to own when you're wrong, or listen to other people's insight and learn and grow from people. When I was a younger coach, I always called myself an army of one. And I tend to have the attitude that if it's going to get done right, then I need to do it myself. And my answer to that now is, is that the best? That's not the best model. The best model is one of cooperation and communication. And with that, we have to be able to see tenderly our own flaws. Where can I grow? Where am I blind? Do I have any blind spots? Am I missing something? And people will share that with you. You'll see that in your interactions. And oftentimes, if you have a trusted friend or trusted peer, I will ask them to deliver, share that with me, but do it gently. Be gentle with me so I can receive it, but then just owning your flaws. So confident humility is what you're striving for. Confidence in that your material, confidence that you've been learning all along, you've put time in, the X's and O's, and how to teach, the cues. The humility, though, to deliver that where it's receivable, that requires experiences, and time as well. Here's where, and this is where, so I just talked about me, my introspection. Now we're going to get to your athletes and the people around you. And this is where I always started. And this was the prayer of one of the great military political leaders of the ancient world. It's from the Old Testament, from the Psalms, and those words were prayed by King David. And if we talk about affirmations for people and who they are when you're dealing with people, your athletes or your family or your friends, the people you work with, the people you meet at the supermarket, I try to see them in this light. And this was David's prayer. I praise you because I am uniquely and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. This I know full well. That is my affirmation when I'm feeling down or when I need to be reminded. This is what I go to. And this is a slide, not this exact slide, but I would share this with our rookies when we'd have rookie minicamp at the Bengals. This was one of the first slides when we had our introductory meeting, who we are as a staff and what we're going to do this year, and welcome to the Bengals. This was the first slide I shared. So we started here. And it's amazing in that demographic, how many young men, these were talented, these were all drafted players, free agents, these were rookie hopefuls, first-year hopefuls on a professional football team, and they had never heard this. They'd never heard it spoken to them. And I know it's a faith statement. It's a scripture statement, but I believe it's a truth. And when you hear that, and Lainey and Tom and Andrea and Bob, this is true about each and every one of us. There's only one of you, all of you in the whole wide world, and you're unique and remarkable. So if you start there in all your relationships, you start there in how you see people, how you treat them, how you coach them, how you teach them, how you correct them, that's going to be a powerful place to start. So here's where we go with that. So starting with them being, everyone you meet, and everyone you encounter is unique and remarkable. As a coach, I believe there's a certain amount of devotion that goes on, being devoted to one another in brotherly love. And that's filial love. There are different types of love, and that's a whole nother talk. But brotherly love is a fondness and a care for another person that grows over time, and it grows because you're in contact with each other. So be devoted. It's self-sacrifice. The current term would be servant leader. That's the hot term right now, but it just means being humble and meeting the needs of other people. So you're pouring in. As a coach, you're pouring in knowledge, you're exhorting, you're encouraging, you're correcting, you're listening, you're coming alongside and making them better. With that, you're pouring in, and you're also trying to draw out the best. One of the mottos, or one of the motivating factors in the NFL for most, I'd say for all athletes, is, can you make me better? That's what athletes oftentimes want to know. Can you make me better? And if you can, I'll listen. So you're always you're pouring in and you're drawing out. And just keep in mind, and this is another hashtag right now, we're training humans. And when I first heard someone mention that recently on Instagram, I chuckled. I thought, that's a great thought and a great theme. Now it'll be overdone. But it's sad that we had to be reminded, hey, you're training people. And that goes back to what Andrea said, get the most out of people, and what Coach Bob said about being humble, and what Coach Johnny Parker said, I train people, not weights. So I guess it's good to remember that they are people with opinions, with joys, with fears, with insecurities, with things that light them up. And it's seeing them and reaching them and pouring in. Let's get to that. We shouldn't really have to say that. And finally, we talked about ourselves, introspection. We talked about the people around you, others. So together, what you're looking for is a spirit of cooperation. And when I coached for the Carolina Panthers in the 90s, Coach Don Bro always talked about the spirit of cooperation. And you could also, in more modern terms, call it collaboration, and realizing that everyone in the room, everyone in your facility, everyone on your building, they're all unique and remarkable. And there's a diversity there that brings great beauty, because we're all different. We all have different gifts, but together we contribute to parts of the whole. We all know we have areas where we can grow and get better in. Some of the people around you might be strong in that area. They may provide that they may fill that gap there and make the whole even greater. So just remembering people's gifting, seeing them with that lens, and always with your athletes and staff, it's always going to be collaboration, which is going to require humility as well. And finally, we thrive. Note that we thrive. We all thrive in a relationship. We were built for relationship. A famous study, the longest longitudinal, I talk about it a lot, the Grant study at Harvard University, was started in 1938. And they studied undergraduates at Harvard University. And it's still going on to this day. And they've had a number of directors that run the study. But the question was, what makes people flourish? What is it that makes people thrive? And they followed, starting 1938, the sophomore class, they followed them throughout the lifetime and continue to follow to this day. And they wondered, was it professional success? Was it money? Was it degrees, academic degrees? Was it the number of children they had, or family success, or happy marriage? What was it that caused people to flourish? What makes us come alive and thrive? And after the statement a few years ago from one of the directors was, 75 years and $40 million later into the Harvard study, what makes people thrive is love, having caring relationships in life. That was the one common thing. It wasn't title, it wasn't salary, it wasn't success in business or in coaching. It was the relationships. And I think that it's imperative, like Andrea said, to continue to stay on the cutting edge. And I'm going to listen to her talk again. And I may have to call her on that, because she's way ahead of the curve on things. And Coach Bob, who's an older experienced coach, who is really running in management, in high performance management, taking experienced hand and applying it to a modern concept and making it work. So those relationships, keep that in mind. Learn all you can, but also strive to pour into others and see others as unique and wonderful. If you start there, everything else will go that much better. So I think I went a little long, but I appreciate you listening. So thank you.
Coach is absolutely incredible. Coach Moore, and I'll tell you the love, the passion, the care that comes out of that talk is truly humbling. And you know, across the board, you all, I mean, this was more than I thought. My hand is on fire from all of the notes that I'm taking. So huge virtual round of applause across the board, because that was absolutely incredible. Couple reminders, all these talks, they will be on indianastrength.com. As always, Coach Virtue is going to be putting out some of the highlight reels of this. That's always exciting. Next week, we got a special week that's going to be devoted to intern programming. So we're going to have Mary Kay and Adam Fight from Springfield College. We're going to have Nick Higgins and Becky Bonaventura, Nick from Washington, Becky from Rutgers, collaborating on how they're working with their intern program. And then Coach Laney Deppie and myself are going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Indiana Strength. So I encourage you, if you're not signed up or not subscribed yet, please go to Indiana Strength, subscribe. And until next week, get out, make today better than yesterday, keep on living. Thank you again for everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. All right.
Coaches, I'm